All right, well, I'm happy to introduce Fahad Islam. So he's been with the lab for X number of years. I don't know what X is, but it was an impressive set of years. He started out as a master's student, worked on all kinds of different things, including PR2 moving pictures and so on. And then has done some impressive stuff on constant time motion planning. And that's the topic that he'll cover. And I also would like to say thanks to the committee that came from all over the world. We have on the West Coast, Seed. We have here in the kind of in Pittsburgh, Chris Atkinson, Oliver, and myself. And then we have out of Israel, Oren Salzman. So thanks to everybody for making it happening. All right, with that, Fahad, go ahead, take over.
Thanks, Max. Welcome everyone to my thesis talk. Today I'll talk about provably constant time motion planning. First of all, I would like to thank my committee, my advisor, Max Likashev, Chris, Oliver, Sid, and Oren for taking the time out to attend my talk. Thank you all. So I'll dive in. So I'll start off with defining the motion planning problems in very simple words. So the motion planning problem is the problem of finding a collision-free path for a robot from some start configuration to some goal configuration. So there might be some other constraints that the motion planner might have to satisfy, for example, kinematic or dynamic constraints or time constraints that could be associated with reaching the goal. So I tried to pick a diverse set of motion planning examples of motion planning tasks from my pre-thesis work, and I'll go through those examples. So this was my MRST project X years ago. So the task here is to autonomously park these car-like robots in this modeled parking lot. So the motion planner has to come up with a feasible plan for each of these cars to navigate through the parking lot and then park at the designated parking spot. So this second example is a mobile manipulation problem where the robot has to pass through this narrow doorway while holding this broomstick, and it has to avoid any sort of collisions. So the motion planner here has to jointly reason about how to move the base of the robot and the arms to avoid any collisions. So this is a final example of a 34 degrees of freedom humanoid motion planning problem. And an edit framework that we developed for this project was to allow a user to provide guidance to the motion planner during planning. So whenever the planner gets stuck in a local minima, it asks the user for guidance, and the user uses an interactive interface to assist the planner, which it then uses to escape local minima. So these were some motion planning examples from my pre-thesis work. So now I'll show you a set of motion planning applications on this scale of task repetitiveness versus planning complexity. And roughly speaking, tasks can be categorized into unstructured, semi-structured, and highly structured categories, depending on how repetitive they are. So I'll show you examples of each. So this is a picture from DARPA Robotics Challenge. So the robots that work in disaster response cases, they completely have to encounter unseen environments. So they have to make their decisions about their motions completely on the fly. So these are one extreme on this scale. On the other extreme, we have highly structured settings. It's a picture of an automotive manufacturing setting where the robots don't even use motion planners. They just replay pre-recorded motions over and over again. So they are highly efficient systems and highly structured at the same time. So in the middle sort of lies these semi-structured domains. So here the tasks, although they are repetitive, but they are not exactly identical. So for example, the start or goal configuration may vary a bit during robot's operation, or the occupancy or the obstacles surrounding the robot may also move a little bit. So in this thesis, we focus on these semi-structured domains, which are encountered often in logistics and warehouse environments. And we want to make the efficiency of these problems as close as possible to highly structured problems. So I'll give a few more examples of such semi-structured settings. Here, a PR2 robot is working at a conveyor belt where objects are coming in at a high speed, and the robot has a limited time window to plan motion and to execute the motion. So this is a repetitive task, and it enforces a strong constraint on the planning time. Here again is a scenario of warehouse where the robot is performing these pick and place operations, picking up mail and sorting them in cubby shelves. Again, the task is repetitive, but exactly not identical. The robot has to pick up objects from like varied start and goal locations. But planning needs to be very efficient to increase the throughput of such systems. So this final example is a truck unloading application. It's a project that I've been a part of with Honeywell and NREC. The task here is to unload these delivery containers as fast as possible. So this robot has an arm with plungers and a scooper or a nose. And the arm is used to pick up these boxes, which it then puts on the nose. The nose has conveyor belts, which move back to unload these boxes. So again, the planning needs to be fast and reliable for efficient operations. So we make the following observations from all these semi-structured settings. The tasks are repetitive and are confined to a small subset of the configuration space, and the environment is largely static. There might be some movable items, but the large part of the environment is still static. And the requirements of these applications is that we need fast and reliable motion planning, often bounded by a fixed planning time. So the research question that we pose in this thesis is that can we leverage pre-processing to develop algorithms that are provably guaranteed to plan in a small fixed amount of time? And to the best of our knowledge, none of the existing algorithms prior to this thesis work provide this guarantee. So now I'll list the contributions of this thesis. We introduced and formalized a new class of motion planning algorithms that we called constant time motion planning algorithms, or CTMP. We developed CTMP algorithms for 3 semi-structured domains: static environments, where the environment's occupancy remains purely static during robot's operation; semi-static environments, where the large part of the environment is static, but some obstacles may move during robot's operation; dynamic environments. Here, the environment, although is largely static, but the goal itself is moving. So the example is the conveyor pickup scenario, where the object that needs to be picked up is moving, which makes the planning problem dynamic in nature. And finally, we show an application of CTMP for a robot shielding task. So here, the robot has to protect itself from any attacks or objects thrown at it by using a shield which it can manipulate to intercept attacks. So these 2 pieces of work were done after my thesis proposal. So here's the agenda of today's talk. I'll talk about CTMP, its problem setup, definition, and key idea. I'll go through some of the related work, and then I'll describe the 3 algorithms which were developed for these 3 domains, followed by theoretical analysis. Finally, I'll show the application for the robot shielding task, followed by conclusions and some future directions of research. So let's start. So before defining CTMP, I want to give a bit of background of complexity in motion planning. So motion planning has been around for more than 3 decades now. In 80s, exact methods were used. These are complete, meaning that if a solution exists to a motion planning problem, they guarantee to find it, otherwise return failure. But these methods were computationally hard. So the community moved towards approximate methods in the last 2 decades. So these methods approximate the motion planning problem and relax the completeness guarantees. Sampling-based methods are the most popular approximate methods. So they approximate the planning problem by random sampling. They are probabilistically complete, and the complexity of these methods is analyzed as a function of the number of samples or the size of a roadmap. Then we have search-based methods. They approximate the planning problem by constructing a grid or a lattice. They are resolution complete, meaning that if a solution exists at a certain resolution of discretization, they guarantee to find it. And their complexity is analyzed as a function of the size of the grid or the lattice. And finally, we have optimization-based methods. They approximate the planning problem using differentiable functions. I would say they are locally complete. So if a solution exists in the local minimum, they find it, otherwise they fail. And the complexity of these methods is analyzed as a function of the number of gradient steps. So the point that I'm trying to make with this background is that for all these algorithms, their complexity is a function of whatever approximation they are using for the motion planning problem. And because of that, they cannot provide fixed time guarantees. So that motivates us for CTMP, because to provide fixed time guarantees, we need algorithms whose computation time is bounded irrespective of whatever approximation the motion planning algorithm uses. So let's look at the problem setup for CTMP. And again, we are considering semi-structured settings. So we define the problem as having a fixed start configuration as start, a goal region G, because we want to handle perturbations in the goal poses, and a static environment with a set of known movable obstacles. Let's call it O. So to give examples of this problem setup, in this conveyor planning problem, the goal region contains all the poses where the incoming object can be perceived in this conveyor pickup task. And the start configuration would correspond to the drop-off location. For this mail sorting example, the goal region is where the robot places the mail, also sorts the mail. And for this tabletop pick and place scenario, in addition to start and goal region, we also have a set of movable obstacles, which are the two blue pictures in the scene. So with this setup, we define a problem set Q, which is a discrete set of motion planning problems and is found by the combination of the start and goal and the configuration space of the movable obstacles. And note here that G and C of O, which is the configuration space, are discretized, which gives us a discrete set Q. So now we'll define CTMP formally. So let Q be our discrete set of planning problems, and let T bound be a user control time bound. An algorithm is said to be CTMP if it guarantees to answer any planning query from Q within the time bound T bound. But note that here T bound cannot be arbitrarily small. So it cannot be 0, for example. It has to be greater than a small time constant, T const. So it's a lower bound on T bound. And T const is the minimum planning time required by the CTMP algorithm. So you can think of this time being consumed by maybe hash lookup operations or something that are that is like necessary to do by CTMP algorithm. And the important point here is that T const is independent of the size and complexity of the planning problem. And because of that, we say that these algorithms are constant time. So here T bound can be is a tunable parameter, and it can be used to trade off query time versus pre-processing efforts or the memory requirements. Because it's a pre-processing based approach, it generates a metadata that is used online to answer queries. So T bound can be used to trade off those two things. We define a new notion of completeness for CTMP algorithms. We call it CTMP completeness. And I'll use an example of a brute forced CTMP method to explain this idea. So here Q is our discrete problem set where every X depicts a motion planning problem. So CTMP method is uses a motion planner P in the pre-processing phase. So to be able to provide constant time guarantees, this brute force method would plan and store solutions to all the problems in this set Q, and then store it in a lookup table to answer any query in constant time. But because we do not have infinite pre-processing time, let's say we enforce a timeout TP for every planning problem. And this method and the motion planner P was able to only solve a subset of these problems. We call that these problems are solvable while the remaining ones are unsolvable. So for completeness sake, we only care about solvable problems. So next, this brute force method will attempt to store the solutions to all these solvable problems. But in semi-structured settings, the size of the solvable set could be extremely large. And the system can run out of memory before it is able to store the solutions to all the solvable problems. So let's say it was able to only store a subset of these problems. We say that these problems are now covered by the algorithm because for this set of problems, it can answer any query in constant time. So we introduced two terms here. A planning problem is solvable if P can find a path to it within a sufficiently large time-bound TP. And a problem is covered by a CTMP algorithm if it can solve it within T-bound time. So with that, we can define CTMP completeness as an algorithm is CTMP complete if it covers all the solvable problems in Q. So in other words, an algorithm is CTMP complete if it is able to answer any query within the solvable set in T-bound time. So you can guess here that this brute force method, because of its memory requirements, is not CTMP complete because it only covers a subset of solvable problems. In this thesis, we seek to develop algorithms which have this property of completeness. So summarizing, we have two properties for CTMP complete algorithms. The first is the CTMP property, which is answering any query in T-bound time. And second is the completeness property, which is having a solution to every solvable problem. So the key idea of a CTMP complete algorithm is that instead of having to store all the solutions, a CTMP complete algorithm attempts to store only a small set of representative solutions that can be used to cover all the solvable problems in Q. So here is a cartoon depiction of that. So in this case, the algorithm, the problems which are circled are the representative solutions, and these can be used to cover the corresponding regions which are color coded. So this is the high level idea, and we'll use different versions of this idea and different algorithms that we'll discuss in this talk. So let's look into some of the related work. There is a class of pre-processing based methods. They construct a graph or a roadmap offline, which is then used at runtime to efficiently find a solution for every planning problem. So they, given a start and goal, they try to connect it to the roadmap or the graph and then use a graph search algorithm to find a solution. But although these algorithms provide speed ups, they do not provide fixed time guarantees. We have another class of real-time planning algorithms. They do provide fixed time guarantees, but they only plan for limited horizons. And because of that, the robots can get into these myopic behaviors where they oscillate between different states before they get to the goal. And finally, we have experience-based planning algorithms. They speed up planning by reusing previous experiences of planning. By either using heuristic functions which guide the search or the planner through previous experiences, or trying to reuse segments from previous plan. We also have data-driven approaches which try to exploit the structure of the planning problem by using machine learning. So our work lies in the intersection of all these classes of algorithms. But unlike these algorithms, we seek CTMP guarantees, which none of these methods provide.
Hey, Fahad, I had a quick question about this. There's some work in the search community about using previous solutions, previous searches. I don't really see that here. So an example would be Andrew Goldberg's work on like reach for A*. Max probably knows a lot about, Max and Oren probably know a lot more about this than I do. But essentially, if you're searching on large graphs, can you use previous solutions or even previous search trees to be able to come up with semi-admissible heuristics, do pruning, the usual like Bellman pruning stuff. Is that covered in something here, or is that subsumed by something here?
So I covered a few experience-based approaches here. So for example, lightning or thunder algorithms. So they use either previous experiences by constructing a roadmap out of those experiences, or literally reusing a library of previous paths, which was the work from Dimitri's group, Dimitri Berenson. And there's also eGraphs by Mike Phillips. But I think I missed citing the work that you just mentioned exactly. But is it like does it fall in the same category, or you would say like it's different?
I mean, I think Max and Oren probably can talk more about it. But essentially, it is in the pure search domain, right? Like let's say you're doing navigation planning on massive graphs, and you want to be able to build better heuristics, right? And so you're using previous solutions as a way to think about how you might be able to generate better heuristics. That's the sort of, it's a pruning step. It's I think it's different from what Dimitri did, but I think it's a little bit closer to what Mike Phillips did. We don't have to talk about this here, but like I was just wondering, and also I think Max and Oren like are the world experts here, so they should probably chime in on this.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, we can talk about that later, but yeah, I think it's definitely falls in within that experience, based with a broadly kind of definition of experience. And there's that work. There's also work from Chile. There are some guys who like do a lot of that stuff. So that should probably be added. So yeah, those are good points.
Okay, so next I'll go through these three algorithms for three different domains. First, for static environments, where we consider this problem setting. So we have a fixed start state, we have a goal region in a static world. So the problem set is formed by the combination of these two. So here, because the start is fixed, so the size of the problem set is equal to the number of goals in the discretized goal region. So the key idea here is that a large region of goals, GI, can be covered via an attractor state using a potential or a heuristic function, HFS, which leads each goal in this subregion to the attractor state. So this idea has been explored previously in the controls community, where a global policy is formed by a combination of different local policies. And so here, instead of having to pre-compute and store plans to all the goals in this subregion GI, we only need to store one plan to this attractor state, and then we can use this heuristic function HFS online to find the partial path from any goal in this goal region to the attractor state. The question arises, how is this region GI computed? It can be very efficiently done using a single Dijkstra-like search, and I'll omit the details of that because it was covered in my proposal talk. So in the pre-processing stage, we compute a set of subregions G1 to K, each defined by an attractor and a radius, such that the union of all these subregions completely covers the solvable problems in G. And at the query stage, given any goal, we first identify which subregion it belongs to using the radii of the subregions. And then we use the heuristic function to find the partial path by G from the goal to the attractor state. In the final step, this path is stitched with the pre-computed path to get the final path pi from the start to the goal. Let's look into some of the theoretical properties. So we assume that the volume V of the goal region is bounded, and that follows from the fact that we are dealing with repetitive tasks. We find an upper bound on K, which is the number of subregions that we pre-compute. We use a result from a paper from computational geometry, which solves this problem of covering an n-dimensional space by spheres. So let J be the volume of a sphere, which is a subregion in our case, and V be the volume of the space, which is the goal region. They define density of coverage as Kj by V, where Kj is the volume of all the regions and V is the volume of the goal region. So the main result of this paper is that they give a lower bound on this density, which we can use to find an upper bound on K. So K is upper bounded by this expression. And if we assume that V is constant, we can say that K is upper bounded by a constant. And here we assume that the volume of a subregion is lower bounded by J. So in this paper, they assume that all the spheres are equal. In our case, that's not the case. So we assume that there is a lower bound on the size of a subregion, which is J. In terms of time complexity, it's given by order of this expression. K is the number of regions. Mod of pi G is the length of the greedy path, the partial path that we compute online, and B is the branching factor. All these terms are upper bounded, are either constants or upper bounded by constants, so the overall complexity is constant. The space complexity is K times
I
the
had a quick question there about the overlap between regions. If your goal exists in an overlap, do you just toss both attractors in as potential like targets?
So the K term here comes from the fact that we just iterate over all the regions until we find the one which, so we just pick the first one.
Oh, I see. The reason I asked was that, like, I was thinking that, like, if there was overlap, then you would have to include a factor for the overlap also. But it looks like you're just picking the first one. Okay, sounds good. Because it gets a little more tricky when you have overlaps and you have to count the overlaps also, right? Like, there would be another factor there that would be like overlap of regions that might come into play here.
Right. So one reason of why we could think about overlaps is that, like, if we are looking for a better solution, we can pick the one which gives us the better solution. But here we are just taking the first one, and we linearly search through the set of regions.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so the space complexity is k times the length of the pre-computed path. Again, k is upper bounded by constant, so that terms drops. And because this algorithm covers all the solvable problems, it's CTMP complete. We tested on the mail sorting task, so we modeled this mail sorting environment, and we compared against two pre-processing based approaches, PRM and MQRT. MQRT is a pre-processing, it's a multi-query variant of RT, and we also compared with eGraphs and RT Connect. We showed a success rate of 100%, and the other baselines showed a success rate of less than 90%. And in terms of planning time, we showed an order of magnitude improvement over the fastest of these baselines.
Hey, Fahad, sorry, Kirill had a question from the chat, which I couldn't answer. So I thought maybe, which is about if a goal is not reachable from an attractor. It seems tricky. Maybe you have an answer to it, but I couldn't figure it out.
Okay, can I address that later after the talk? I'll be happy to do so.
Of course, sure.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kiran. So we did some preliminary testing on this truck unloading domain. This robot has a 4 degrees of freedom arm, a 3 degrees of freedom nose, and a mobile base. So we configured the algorithm to plan for different combinations of these kinematic chains, and we showed like several orders of magnitude speed ups over like pure online algorithms. So in summary, we developed CTMP algorithms for static environments. The problem set was found by the start and the goal region. We compress the goal region here to get to only store solutions for a subset of goals. And the key idea was to make use of these attractor regions, and we tested on the mail sorting domain. Next, we'll consider semi-static environments. So here again, we have some movable obstacles in the scene, but the large part of the environment is static. This was collaboration with folks at NVIDIA, and it was my intensive work during the summer. So the motivation again here is that the robots are often, they operate alongside humans or other robots in semi-structured settings where their large part of the environment is static, but there could be some movable objects, for example, these blue pictures in the scene. And we still want to be able to provide strong guarantees on the planning time. So to this end, we propose an algorithm that we called alternative paths planner that guarantees to provide fixed time guarantees, that guarantees to provide fixed time planning for the semi-structured, semi-static settings. Let's break down the problem setup. We have a start configuration. We have a goal region, which is discretized here. Each goal is a position and orientation for the target object. And we have a semi-static world W. It has two components, WO and WS. WO contains a fixed set of movable obstacles, and WS is the rest of the static space. And so the problem set is formed by an additional term, which is CO, which is the discretized configuration space of the movable obstacles. So the key idea of app is very simple. I'll use this simple cartoon to illustrate the key idea. So let's say we have a start and goal, some static obstacles shown in gray, and two movable obstacles shown in red. So in this case, if we pre-compute 3 paths which are separated enough, then one of the paths is guaranteed to be collision-free, provided that these two movable obstacles are not too close to the start and the goal. So similar idea has been explored previously to compute a diverse set of paths, but here we are seeking a property that one of these diverse set of paths is going to be collision-free, no matter how the movable obstacles are configured. So for each goal, we plan a set of alternative paths offline, such that for any configuration of the movable obstacles, one of the paths is collision-free. So let's see how app pre-computes such a set of paths. So we have our setting where we have some static obstacles, two movable obstacles, and a start and goal. In the first step, app finds the first path pi1 by only avoiding static obstacles. It then constructs an envelope around this first path. An envelope is a set of all obstacle configurations that intersect with a path. So the dark shaded region shows the envelope, and the light shaded region shows the occupancy of that envelope. So this envelope can be computed by inflating the path by the size of the obstacle. We then compute a second path, avoiding the first envelope and the static obstacles. We say that these two paths are disjoint, meaning that no configuration of the movable obstacle can intersect with both the paths at the same time. And two paths are disjoint if their envelopes don't overlap. So at this point, if we have to handle one movable obstacle, we are done because because we are guaranteed that one of the two paths is going to be collision free. But to handle two movable obstacles, we need three disjoint paths. So next, to do so, app computes a second envelope e pi 2 around the path pi 2 and attempts to find the third disjoint path. At this point, it fails because the two envelopes block off the third path. So app bisects one of these two envelopes into two child envelopes. In this case, it bisects e pi 1 into two child envelopes el and er, and then attempts to find paths around each of these two child envelopes. So in the top figure, it finds the third path pi 3 around the envelope e pi 2 and this child envelope er. In the bottom figure, it finds the fourth path pi 4 around e pi 2 and this child envelope el. So at this point, app has sufficient paths to handle any two configurations of the movable obstacle. But note that if app fails to find path around any child envelope, it has to recursively bisect these envelopes until it has a path around every child or every leaf. In the query phase, given any configuration of the movable obstacles, the algorithm iterates over the set of pre-computed paths until it finds the one which is collision free. And the important point here is that the algorithm doesn't require any collision checking in this operation. It can use the information of the envelopes to identify the path which is collision free. And by the definition of an envelope, the envelope which does not contain the given obstacle configurations is the one which is collision free. And this can be checked by in constant time. So we demonstrated app for a mail sorting task where the robot has to pick up the red ball here and avoiding collision with the movable obstacles which are nearby and then place it in a cubby. We approximate the geometry of the movable obstacles, the ball, and the robot using spheres. And note that the same path can be used in reverse direction to go back to the start configuration. Now I'll give a rundown of the pre-processing phase for this manipulation domain. I'll visualize the disjoint paths and the computed envelopes. So first, app finds the first path, only avoiding the static obstacles. It then finds the second path around the static obstacles as well as the first envelope. Finally, it finds the third disjoint path by avoiding the two envelopes and the static obstacles. So now I'll visualize all the three disjoint paths simultaneously.
So Fahad, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
It seems like you can give a bound on the number of possible alternative paths depending on the domain and the footprint of the robot, right? Or the arm.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it in a couple of slides.
Okay, then I'll shut up.
Getting there. Thank you. So here is the query phase. So app looks up the paths from this set of three pre-computed paths. In the three columns, we are showing example queries where the path 1, path 2, and path 3 were selected by app respectively. So exactly what Warren was asking for, we find an upper bound on K for specific types of environments. It's a function of the environment. And K here is the number of alternative paths for a particular start goal pair. So first example is the case where we have n movable obstacles and there are no static obstacles in the scene. So it's a free space, unbounded free space. In this case, app can find the required number of disjoint paths. So the complexity is order of n, where n is the movable obstacles. So the second type is when there is one movable obstacle in the scene and one narrow passage. And here is a depiction, 2D depiction of that. So in this case, one configuration of the movable obstacle will block off this narrow passage. We know that for one movable obstacles, we need two disjoint paths. And this narrow passage is going to block off the second disjoint path. And the algorithm will have to go through log m bisections to finish, and resulting in log m paths. So the complexity is order of log m. We generalize that to p narrow passages. In this case, the complexity that we get is p log m by p. In terms of time complexity, it simply is order of k because we have to iterate through the entire set of paths. Again, if the disjoint paths exist, then we know that k is order of n. So the complexity becomes order of n. And if, with our assumption that the number of movable obstacles is fixed, we get constant time complexity. Space complexity is k times the size of the goal region. So we don't do any compression along the goal region, the axis. So the complexity becomes the size of the goal region because k is upper bounded by a constant. And so under the assumption that the required number of disjoint paths exist, the algorithm is CTMP complete. We tested on two domains, shelving and sorting. For the shelving domain, the robot has to reach out to a can while avoiding collisions in the front section of the shelf. And for the sorting domain, as I said previously, it has to pick up the red bowl, avoiding collisions with the nearby obstacles, and then place it in a cubby. We showed a success rate of 100% with a mean planning time of under 10 microseconds, showing several orders of magnitude speed up over state-of-the-art baselines. We tested in simulation. So here it's a tabletop environment. The robot has to pick up the red bowl while avoiding collisions with the pitchers. We labeled run as a success if the robot picks up the object without hitting any pitchers. We also tested on the real robot. Here we use in-hand camera to detect the poses of the target object and the mobile obstacles. And the captions in the video show the current state of the system. And note that the planning happens between detecting objects and following trajectory. The time is hardly noticeable and is yet mostly consumed by path post-processing or post-profiling. So far, we have discussed two algorithms. In semi-static settings, we have this additional terms in the problem set, which is the discrete configuration space of the movable obstacles. And we compress this third term using the key idea of having disjoint alternative paths. And we tested in these two domains of mail sorting and shelving. So next, we'll talk about the final domain, which is dynamic environments. Again, the motivation is that robots are deployed often in these at conveyor belts where they have to pick up fast-moving objects. The planning needs to be fast and reliable. And another challenge that arises is that robots usually have noisy perception. So they get a first noisy estimate and they must start moving early on, relying on that noisy estimate to be able to reach the object in time. And as they get improved estimates from perception, they have to adjust their motion on the fly to successfully execute the task. So we have two requirements. We need to be able to plan and replan in constant time. Here is a full system in running. The conveyor moves at the speed of 20 centimeters per second, and we enforce a time bound of 0.2 seconds. On the right, we see the camera view, which is used for object detection and pose estimation. So at this point, a robot receives the first estimate from perception. It generates the plan, starts executing it, gets an updated estimate with a correction, replans. Finally, it gets the third estimate with no correction, so continues to follow the previous plan until it picks up the object successfully. Here is another run with a different camera view. Again, after a couple of replanning iterations, the robot is able to successfully pick up the sugar box. So let's break down the problem setup. We know the speed of the conveyor belt. We know the model of the target object, which is used for grasp selection and collision checking. And we specify the goal region, which is a set of all poses of the incoming object that can be perceived when the object comes in the field of view of the robot. We define a home state, which is the drop-off location, and we specify a time bound for the planner. The query here is composed of a start and goal because we need to be able to replan as well. So we don't have a fixed start. And the problem set is formed by a set of start state and a discretized goal region. So to understand the complexity of this problem, we look into a brute force method. So here I'm showing a home state, goal region with a discrete set of goals, and the robot might have to be able to replan from any intermediate state as well. So brute force method will pre-compute plans for every start and goal, store it in a lookup table to answer any query in constant time. To break it down, at time step T0, it needs to plan n paths where n is the number of goals in the goal region. These paths generate n states at time step T1, from which the robot might have to replan. So from each of these n state, it has to compute additional n paths, resulting in order of n squared paths. And so you can see that the complexity increases exponentially with the time steps. And theoretically, these paths can be stored in a lookup table to answer any query in constant time. But this approach is clearly intractable because of its memory and pre-computation requirements. So in our approach, we make use of experience-based planning. We use an experience-based planner, let's call it P. So such a planner can use experiences to speed up planning for similar queries. So to give an example here, P can use the experience pi1 to plan to all the goals within this subregion G1 within T-bound time. So again, instead of having to store paths to all the goals in this subregion, we only need to store a single experience, which can cover the entire subregion. So the key idea is to compute a small set of experiences for every start state that cover G full using the experience-based planner P. So a depiction of that would look something like this. So we have only handled one short planning up till now. To be able to replan, app needs to generate experiences from other states as well. So it iterates through the states on these experiences and generates additional experiences so that the planner can replan from these states as well. And this process has to be done recursively, since adding new experiences generates new states, which also needs to be processed. We tested on the conveyor pickup problem, and we report a success rate here. We get a success rate of about 70%. We also tested with single shot planning, only relying on the initial pose, which is the second row here, and we get the lowest success rate there because the error is too large for the first estimate. And in the third row, we wait for an accurate estimate before execution. So the success rate is still lower because at that time, the robot doesn't have enough time to react. The time complexity that we get is order of T, where T is the number of time steps from the start to the goal. And because the object has a fixed time cycle, T, the number of time steps is constant, we get order of 1 complexity. In terms of space complexity, in the worst case, we get exponential complexity in K, where K is the number of experiences for any start state. And we have our theorem that the algorithm is CTMP complete because it covers all the solvable problems. So summarizing whatever we have discussed so far, in this case, we have the problem set created by a set of start states in the goal region. The key idea is experience-based planning, and we demonstrated on this conveyor pickup task. So now I'm getting to the last piece of this talk, where I'll show an application of CTMP for this robot shielding task. So the motivation here is quite futuristic. We want to be able to replace human cops with robocops for dangerous scenarios. And one of the capabilities of this robocop would be to be able to protect itself from any attacks by manipulating a protective shield. So interestingly, the challenges with respect to motion planning are quite similar to the conveyor planning problem. The environment is dynamic because the object that needs to be intercepted is moving. And we get noisy perception if we are using onboard perception, and we have to be able to adjust the motion on the fly. So I want to emphasize here that the T bound, which is the planning time bound that we specify here, is very tight because of this task. So the range of attacks that we are looking at is about 10-meter range, and which gives us roughly a flight time of 1 second, out of which 200 milliseconds is consumed in perception, and the remaining 700 milliseconds is used in execution. So we are left with only a time of 50 milliseconds if we consider like some overheads as well. And this time is split up into different replanning episodes if we have to do replanning. And I'm being optimistic here in these times. So the problem setup is pretty simple. We have a robot with a manipulator arm and a shield that is rigidly held by its end effector, and we specify a time bound for planning. So we solve 2 problems here. First, we need to specify the goal region that captures the spales of all possible attacks. And we need to come with CTMP algorithm that would generate a path in constant time for any start goal pair. So problems that look similar to the conveyor problem, where we have a set of start states and sort of goal and a discretized goal region. So to specify a goal region, we specify two domes around the robot. We call it DI and DO. So the inner dome DI approximates the geometry of the robot. So we transform the problem as now we need to protect the inner dome instead of the exact geometry of the robot. And this outer dome DO sort of captures the reachable space of the robot. So it covers the reachable region of the robot. So the goal region would be the space of all attacks that enter DO and hit DI. So how do we discretize this goal region? Let's see in this next slide. So to discretize the goal region, we need to specify the geometry of the shield and the domes. So we pick a shield of a square shaped of dimensions L cross L, and we select domes to be of cuboid shapes. So we discretize the domes by cells of size L cross L, which is equal to the size of the shield. And you might have guessed the key idea here that all attacks that pass through one cell in the outer dome and one cell in the inner dome can be intercepted by a single pose of shield because the size of the shield is the same as the size of the cell. So a 2D depiction of that would look something like this. So here I'm visualizing two cells, one from the outer dome, one from the inner dome. And we show a line connecting the center of these two cells, which we call a goal line. So if the shield is positioned anywhere on this line and is oriented orthogonal to it, it will block all the attacks that enter DO and hit DI through this pair of cells. And here we assume that the object of attack follows a straight line motion between the space in these two domes. So a goal is a line joining a pair of cells, and a goal region is formed by all these goal lines formed by all possible pairs of cells. For CTMP planning, we use an adapted algorithm from the conveyor pickup task. The simplification that we make is that we don't use experience-based planning because here the time bound is very tight. So we just pick t bound is equal to t const, where t const we know is the minimum time in which CTMP algorithm can answer any query. So here we show the coverage map for the front wall of the outer dome. So for each cell, we are showing the ratio of the number of covered goal lines over the total number of goal lines. So the lighter, the better. And here we can see that the right section of this heat map, like with respect to the robot, is lighter because we are using the right arm for planning here. Here we show a visualization of the approach for single shot planning, so without any replanning. We are visualizing the projectile motion for the attack, and we are also visualizing the goal line which connects the center of the cells through which this projectile passes. And of course, we are visualizing the trajectory of the robot that blocks the attack. So here we are showing the system with replanning. So we sort of simulate noisy perception. We send a perception estimate, and then after a certain duration, we send an updated estimate, and the robot reacts to that by replanning. We also ran real robot experiments. So here for perception, we estimate the poses of the incoming object, and then we fit a projectile to identify the goal. Here is the run in slow motion. So I really want to thank my lab mates. They are like, the credit goes to them to put together this demo because I was not in the lab and working remotely. So all the credit goes to these old friends of mine. So in summary, we make the following 5 contributions. We introduced the concept of CTMP. We developed CTMP algorithms for 3 different semi-structured domains, and we showed the application of CTMP for the robot shielding task. So finally, the main limitation of CTMP framework is that if the set of unsolvable problems in the problem set is very large, then the pre-processing can take a lot of time because to ensure completeness, it has to pre-process all those unsolvable queries. So to this end, one interesting future direction could be to use any timeness in pre-processing. So this would relax the CTMP completeness. So for example, if we are given a bound on the pre-processing time, we can formalize the pre-processing problem as to be able to maximize the number of problems in the problem set which can be covered in whatever the time bound is provided to us. So another direction could be asymptotic coverage. To give an example of that, instead of having a single shot pre-processing phase, we can interleave pre-processing and query phases. For example, if a robot is working at a warehouse, it can collect data throughout the day, and it can process that data the next night. And if all the examples are coming from a single distribution in the limit of the data that we collect, the system will be able to converge to completeness. So we say that it's a notion of probabilistic completeness. And tangential to these ideas, we can also use anytimeness in solution quality. So we can utilize T-bound to improve solution quality as well. And we can also extend to more complex domains. Here, we haven't seen this problem set so far in the algorithms that we developed. So an example of such a problem set where we have a set of start states, set of goals, and movable obstacles as well, is multiple robots working at a conveyor belt where they have to pick up objects while avoiding collisions with the objects that might need to be picked up by other robots. So that's a problem setting where we can have such a problem set. So with that, I would like to thank all my collaborators, which I had the pleasure to work with over the course of my PhD. And here is a summary of the algorithms, and I'll take any questions at this point. I think I'll leave at this slide.
All right.